Now we're here. So we're going to try Nick Wagoner one more time. Covers the 49ers for ESPN. Nick, do you think that Fred Warner is going to play on Saturday in Seattle?
Boy, I mean, if you'd have asked me that question at the beginning of this week, I would have said no. As we sit here right now, I think there's a chance at least. I don't want to sit here and say that it's definitely going to happen or definitely not going to happen, but a combination of things over the last, let's call it 48 hours that have pointed to at least the possibility of that. Number one, when I asked him directly yesterday, what about this week? Is it possible? He did not say no. And not only that, but he kind of went out of his way to point out that, well, they said they weren't going to open the window this week, and then they opened the window. So that was kind of a top point in this. And then we went out to practice, and you get to lay eyes on him. And, when you're around a guy and you watch him play and practice a lot, you just kind of know what they look like when they're doing pretty well. And Fred Warner looked pretty close to the Fred Warner that we know. I'm not going to sit here and say he's 100%. We don't get to watch anything but some individual drills, but he obviously brought a lot of juice. At minimum, guys, he's given them a boost, which I think, just from an emotional standpoint, is important, particularly after they lost George Kittle last week. So having him around, having him on the practice field has been beneficial. If he can play, that would be even more so. But even just having him in the building, knowing that there's a chance he could be back next week, if it's not this week, I think is beneficial for them just from an emotional standpoint.
We are talking to ESPN's Nick Wagoner. Nick, Ricky Pearsall, where are we at with him? And to be honest with you, just the way that his season's gone, has it changed your perspective on his long-term sort of place with the San Francisco 49ers, just his inability to stay on the field?
Yeah, first, James, I think the number one thing for this week, it looks like he's tracking to play. He spoke yesterday, said he's going to play, but he also put the caveat on it of like, I have to play a little different. I can't necessarily go out there and look for yards after the catch and doing the things that I would normally do in terms of physicality and being aggressive once the ball is in his hands. I think that's a trade-off the Niners would happily take. They have missed him just in terms of his ability, like the one guy in the receiver core who can stretch the field a little bit, has the ability to beat man coverage, had a good game up there in Seattle all the way back in week 1. So he's at least proved that he can get open against a really good secondary and defense. So having him would be beneficial. I don't know that it's necessarily going to be him at 100%. He doesn't look fully healthy based on watching him in practice, but it seems like it's trending towards him being able to play. To answer your second question, I would actually take it a step further and say that I think that the Niners can't afford to go into this offseason and not view wide receiver as one of their, let's call it, top 2 needs on the roster. And part of that is you just don't know what you have in Ricky Pearsall. You know that he's a pretty good player when he's out there. You also know that he hasn't been able to consistently be out there. And, of course, some of that is out of his control. All of it's out of his control from an injury standpoint. But the shooting, of course, was something that was just a rare situation. But beyond that, he has struggled even in training camp in the offseason to, string practices together. And then, of course, when the season arrives, string games together. But adding that to the likely subtraction of Brandon Ayuk, adding that to Juwan Jennings being an unrestricted free agent, like wide receiver has to be a top priority for this team, and probably not just one, but maybe a couple of guys that they're going to need to bring in.
ESPN's 49ers beat reporter Nick Wagoner joining us here on the Insiders, ESPN 1320 Sacramento sports leader. Nick, I got one more injury thing for you, although it feels like with this 49ers season, we could just make this all about injuries. But D. Winters is one that I'm kind of interested in. We saw Garrett Wallow go play really well last week. Did his performance perhaps change the 49ers perspective on trying to get D. Winters back onto the field at all? Or is it, he's cleared, he can go, he might be 80%, but they're going to play him?
Yeah, I don't know if it would be at 80% they're going to play him. I think that Wallow did well enough that they can look at it and say, like, where is D. Winters? How close to 100%? And then there's a sliding scale from there in terms of whether he's going to be plugged back in. But D. Winters is their weak side linebacker. And it's funny, guys, because a week ago, everyone was up in arms about the potential of Garrett Wallow playing simply because they really didn't know Garrett Wallow and they saw him play a dozen snaps or whatever against Seattle in week 18 and not do very well. And now everybody wants him to be the starter no matter what. So it's funny how that stuff can work. But obviously, Wallow did play very well last week. He and Eric Kendricks seemed to work really well in tandem and communicate really well. But D. Winters, he was supposed to be a non-participant in practice the other day. Now, granted, that was just a walkthrough, but still, it was notable that he was limited, and then he was limited again yesterday, which means he's at least tracking in the right direction. But having not really been able to kind of see him go through team drills or anything like that, I don't know exactly where he stands, but it does seem like he's going to be at least available this week, if not back in the starting lineup.
Nick, you cover this team. I've covered Sacramento Kings team forever. And, I know in the first Beam team season, I was just so surprised what was happening while I was watching it, because I was so trained to expect bad things and all of a sudden good things were happening. You've been you've got to cover a really good franchise. But does it still surprise you that with everything that's happened to this team, that they're still standing at this moment, whether it's injuries or just like the way the season's played out?
Absolutely. Yeah. I'd be lying. And I don't want to revise history and say that I saw this coming or that I thought they were going to, honestly, even before the injuries going into the season, I felt like maybe their ceiling was around 10 wins. And, and the way the season would play out would be different in the sense of they'd probably start slow, and maybe if the rookies and some of the young guys kind of took a step forward toward the end of the year, they'd be able to turn it on. Very similar to what the Rams were a few years ago. I wrote a story about how this is kind of following that same model in terms of the offseason roster reset that they did. And then, the Rams team did that. They kind of gathered momentum at the end of the year, had young guys playing really well, and then they snuck into the playoffs. But this team didn't do that. They've been in the mix from the very beginning. And even after the injuries, they've been able to kind of survive that. And I think, it's one of those things that none of these guys like seeing their star teammates or any of their teammates leave with injury. But I think that you reach a point almost where it happens so frequently that I don't want to say become numb to it, because that's not the right word, but you know how to handle it better. And you've got guys who are more prepared because they've seen it happen so many other guys that was like, well, what happens if the guy in front of me goes down? I got to be ready, because that's my opportunity to make a name for myself, potentially make some money for my family down the line, all those things that are part and parcel of this deal. And so, yeah, this has been, I think it's Kyle Shanahan's best coaching job. I think they've really exceeded expectations here, and they're kind of playing with house money, which I think is maybe the one thing that they really have working for them going into this Seattle game is nobody expects them to win. And if they do, certainly they will be in a position that is pretty familiar to them, and who knows what happens.
Nick Wagoner covers the 49ers for ESPN. Nick, one more thing before we get you out of here. Do you think Robert Saleh is the 49ers defensive coordinator next year?
It's funny because I think about a month ago, I would have said that there's very little chance that he's back. As we sit here now, I've trended maybe more towards there's a chance that he's back. But I also would say there's a lot of jobs open right now, and a lot of teams that are interested in Robert Saleh. And I think there's a couple of places that make a lot of sense for him if those teams want to go that direction, namely Baltimore and Pittsburgh. It's just kind of the hard-nosed, Robert Saleh defense, I think would fit really well in both of those cities. He's kind of an AFC North type of guy. And so if either one of those opportunities became real for him, I definitely think he would go. After that, I'm not sure. I spent some time with him last month. I talked to him about a lot of different stuff. I just really got the impression that, his situation and what happened in New York puts him in a position where he, does know that he needs to strike while the iron's hot because those jobs don't come around too often, but also simultaneously be discerning about what the right situation is. And the word that I keep using is infrastructure. Like, he wants an ownership group that gives him the resources to do his job, but also isn't meddling per se. And so there's certain situations where I'm not sure would be a great fit. I look at, Cleveland, Arizona, maybe not ideal for him. Those are a couple of places I know that are interested, but I'm not sure those would be a landing spot for him. A lot of people have talked about the Raiders. The Raiders, of course, were interested in him last year, both as a defensive coordinator and as potentially a long-term head coach replacement for Pete Carroll. I will say, guys, Tom Brady, part owner of the Raiders, he is in kind of the situation that John Lynch was in back when Kyle Shanahan got hired as head coach here, where he's doing the Niners games 2 weeks in a row here in the playoffs. So he's at least getting an up-close look at Robert Saleh. To my knowledge, the Raiders haven't put in a request for him yet, but I think that's just something to kind of keep in the back of your head over the next couple weeks here as these things play out. So long-winded way of saying I think there's still a pretty good chance that he's a head coach somewhere next year, but I'm not as certain about it as I was maybe a month ago.
A lot of good reporters on the 49ers beat. Nick Wagoner is the best of them over there at ESPN. Nick, thanks so much for making time, man.
You got it, guys. Take care. See ya.
Talk soon.